Well, hiya, BookTube. Bill Ruttenberg here with the Ruttenberg Library. It's been a while since I've talked to you, and so I wanted to bring a video to you. And today's video is going to be a book chat about a book that I read. It's actually been a few weeks ago when I finished it, but this was the book The Inheritors by Eve Fairbanks, an intimate portrait of South Africa's racial reckoning. And this was a special book for me because the author had reached out and contacted me and asked me if I was interested in reading and just giving some thoughts on the book and being brutally honest with my thoughts. And that's what I'm going to try to do in this video here. So I guess first of all, I just want to start with thank you to Eve Fairbanks for reaching out and asking me to read her book. It was a wonderful piece of journalistic history, is kind of what I'm going to call that. It was looking at South Africa and the issue of apartheid and dealing with all of the racism that was formed there in that country and how it still is unfortunately alive there today. And as I said, this was The Inheritors by Eve Fairbanks. It's a Simon & Schuster book. It came out this year, 2022. It is 399 pages long, 376 pages of actual text in the story. The rest of it would be your index and your endnotes and stuff like that. This book came out when it came out, or this year when it came out. It was $27.99 here in the United States, $36.99 if you are in Canada buying this. So this is a fairly new book. This is a book that I would recommend anybody that is studying the issue of racism, issues in Africa, issues with colonialism, issues with there's just all kinds of reasons to read this book. This is a great book. Let me read the end or the back cover to you about Eve Fairbanks. So Eve Fairbanks writes about change in cities, countries, landscapes, morals, values, and our ideas of ourselves. A former political writer for the New Republic, her essays and reportage have been published in the Washington Post, the New York Times, and the Guardian, among other outlets. Born in Virginia, she now lives in Johannesburg, South Africa. The Inheritors is her debut. So this was a heck of a debut novel. There's our author there. I thought she did a wonderful job with this very first book that she has put together. And what is neat is that it isn't just an American writing about some other country. She actually has moved there. She lives there amongst the people. And so she's gotten a very good feel for what life is like in South Africa. And she, through her interviews and traveling the country, she was able to get a real good firsthand account of what the changes in South Africa were like for the people and the country itself. So, as I said, this book was the story of apartheid, which was, and I might get the percentages wrong. I didn't write them down. I should have, but like 10% of the people were white Europeans who had moved and colonized South Africa. 90% of the population was South African, and so we get this definite divide between white and black in South Africa. And when colonialism hit South Africa, they changed the law system and made sure that whites would stay on top in the law system, and black South Africans would lose pretty much all of their rights in that country. And this was definitely a negative for this country, a negative for the people in general, and it basically legalized racism, and which is absolutely terrible. And so they lived through the 1900s dealing with these issues. And then in the 1980s, what we started to see was a movement for change. And of course, everybody's probably heard of Nelson Mandela, who was one of the leaders of that movement. And he did a lot to, him and several other leaders did a lot to bring change to South Africa to end apartheid. And in 1994, apartheid ended. We had our first actual election where everybody could get a voice in the vote, and Nelson Mandela is voted in as our first black leader, and it definitely ushered in a big change in South Africa. And so this book is broken into 3 parts. It starts with early on with apartheid, what life was like living under apartheid, and then it goes through the big change in the early 1990s as apartheid was coming to an end, and then the last part is dealing with what is life like since that change and have things really changed. And she does, Eve Fairbanks does a wonderful job of taking us along that journey. The real big thing that I took note of, if anybody's ever watched the show 2020 or Dateline, shows like that, that's kind of how this book reads. It runs through this historical event, but it uses the lives of people who actually lived through it, and so it is truly a piece of journalistic history. The main characters are Dipua, Maleka, and Christo, and hopefully I'm saying those right. Dipua was a mother who lived under apartheid and would have to see this change, and her daughter Maleka was one of those ones that was really, really pushing for the change. She was young, rebellious, and always wanting to see apartheid end. And then Christo's a white who served in the military as that change was happening. He got to see the before and after of that, and their stories are, how do you even want to say it? It definitely brings out what life was like in South Africa. And so this book really looks at, as I said, the beginning, middle, and end of apartheid, but it gets into all of the social issues that were going on inside of the country, from just what life was like inside the homes, what the education system was like, what it gets into economic issues and what it's like to live on both, the upper end of things and the lower end of things, and the basic lack of social mobility for the most part. There are people who try to climb out of the lower class and into the middle and upper class, but it is a very, very long journey for that to even happen, if it can happen. And it really talks about how hard it was for Black South Africans to be able to make good for themselves even after apartheid ended. It's a really good look at that. And then it also, of course, gets into the political issues of apartheid and what having legal racism, basically, what that does to a country, what it does to a people, and how this really damages a people. It is really hard to get rid of. And here in the United States, from our past up to the present, we see this as well, that it's not something that ends overnight. We had a civil war, and it took another 100 years for a civil rights movement, and we're still going through that movement. And here in South Africa, they are going through that process themselves, where they're seeing that this is not an overnight fix. And so I think it really does a good job of just asking questions like, what is equality? How do you find equality? How do you end racism? It's something that's easy to say, but very, very hard to do, because it's so ingrained in the culture, so ingrained in the people themselves. And what we find at the end is there is no easy answer. And so anyway, if you are somebody that is looking for a book on South Africa and the end of apartheid and what that did to the people, especially socially, this is definitely a book for you. The Inheritors by Eve Fairbanks. I really enjoyed this book, and I highly recommend it to anybody dealing with social issues. And so, BookTube, I hope this helps you get an idea to read this book. And again, thank you to Eve Fairbanks for letting me go through this book, and I enjoyed this story very much. It was rough to read. It was troubling obviously looking at racism and what it does to people. But I'm very glad that I read it, and it goes really well with my world studies, and it's going to help me definitely teaching my students in the classroom and what life is really like for people that live under things like apartheid. So, BookTube, I hope this has helped you, and until next time, happy reading.